Hello, today I'm going to be speaking about a believer's restored self-identity. When a believer looks into the mirror, they should hear the words of the psalmist echoing in their ears. I am fearfully made and wonderfully made, in his likeness and image. A reflection of God on earth. Humanity's self-identity has been framed with this reality. Self-identity is also known as self-concept, which means that we have a mental idea, a mental image of who we are and what our identity is. Nonetheless, sin has altered the way that we see ourselves. We also have struggles as believers. Self-identity also impacts our lives. The question is, how do we perceive ourselves? God's redemptive plan helps lead humanity back to have a restored self-identity that was established before in the beginning. Sin caused self-identity in humanity to be damaged, to be altered. And Apostle Paul made mention of this when in Romans chapter 7, he spoke about that we have internal conflicts. The serpent in chapter 3 of Genesis talked about that he wanted to alter the identity of man. God had already told them who they were, but Satan told them who they can be. In this case, to be like God. When we look at the Wycliffe Bible Dictionary, when it talks about fallen man, it states that even though they were still with the natural likeness of God, they still had an entirely lost image as far as their moral aspect. Now, humanity struggled with their self-identity. Gary Collins, the author of Christian Counseling, talks about that sin leads to this interpersonal conflict that attempts to have this self-justification and has a tendency to blame others for their weaknesses. All of these types of influence that we feel about ourselves often produce guilt and of course lowers our self-esteem. Adam and Eve, when they experienced that shame, they ran away from God when they heard their voice. And today Satan continues to take advantage of humanity's state of sin. That's why in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, it talks about that the God of this age, of this century, has blinded the minds of those who are non-believers, and they cannot see the light of God or the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. That's why humanity needs the good news of the gospel that's found in Jesus. There is no doubt that Jesus had the mind of knowing who he was and what his self-identity was. God confirmed this when he was in baptism, when Jesus went to be baptized in Matthew chapter 3. It talks about that all the Trinity was there present to confirm and affirm the purpose that he had come to do at that point. And it also talks about that the Father went ahead and spoke and said, "This is my Son, my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And Christ also had a clear reality of himself. He knew who he was, he knew what he needed to do, and he knew how he needed to accomplish it. That's why in his death, followed by his resurrection, he gives now humanity the opportunity to restore that self-identity that had been lost before. Now, as the Apostle Paul states in 2 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 17, we are now a new creation. The old thing has passed, now we are a new creation. The old things have passed. In other words, that everything that was in our past has no control of our lives and does not impact our present state nor changes or determine our identity. Humanity is now given another opportunity to be what God had intended them to be. There's a new way of thinking, like Paul states in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17 to 24, that a believer becomes a new man, a new person. The old man is ignorant, according to this verse, and his heart is full of blindness, but the new man has a renewed mind. The Greek word for renewed in verse 23 of this verse, explained by Jamieson, Fausset, and Brown commentary, means renewal from the old state of mind. As I conclude, it was God's intention to make man into his likeness and his image. Humanity fell into the temptation by the serpent, altering how they should see themselves. Since then, humanity has struggled to find a strong and healthy self-identity. Christ is the good news, known as the gospel, which resolved the issues of sin and is the second Adam, as Paul states, that restores the identity established from the beginning. As a result, each believer has a benefits from this restored self-identity. There's clarity on who they are in Christ, a healthy self-esteem of themselves. Their values are aligned with God's will. And I want to go ahead and read this portion stated here in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. It's the New King James Version. It states, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Believers are a chosen generation. Believers are a royal priesthood. Believers are a holy nation. A believer now can continue to view themselves in a mirror and know that the Bible has full evidence that shows eternal value in the sight of God. Thank you.